Some might say that great progress has been made towards reaching equality between men and women, at least in some key areas, such as education and health. But there is still a critical area where women are underrepresented, and that is decision-making. An equitable society is one where power and access to it is open to all. Positions of power are filled using a transparent selection process based on objective criteria and skill assessment. International conventions stress the importance of equitable access and participation of women and men in decision-making as a necessary condition for women's interests to be taken into account.
What does decision-making mean? A decision-making position is one from where it is possible to make or influence a decision, to exercise authority, whether in the public or in the private sector. In the public sector, it usually refers to key positions in economic, political, and administrative spheres. This includes the Houses of Parliament and Central Bank, and senior positions in the civil service. The gender balance in decision-making is also important in the judiciary, the media, and the private sphere.
An indicator of gender equality and women's empowerment is the extent of women's representation in top positions in politics. Are women heads of state or government? To what degree are women represented in national parliaments or in ministerial or sub-ministerial positions? If women are represented, are they in specific areas of government, for example, in health and education ministries? Or are they also represented in such core ministries such as Ministry of Home Affairs, Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Finance or Defence? As the graph shows, for the given countries, the share of women among the core ministers is very low, if any.
This graph shows that for the countries in the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe region, the percentage of women among members of national parliaments varies greatly, ranging between no female representation in Kyrgyzstan to almost 50% in Sweden.
There may be significant changes over a period of time in the proportion of women in the highest decision-making positions. For example, in Sweden, a country with an almost equal representation of women among parliamentarians, there has been steady progress throughout the 20th century.
The involvement of women in subnational governmental bodies, that is, in regional and municipal levels of government, should also be measured. Regional and local level political posts may provide an entry point from which women could, in time, progress to the national level.
The participation of women candidates in elections is another potential indicator. For this indicator, statistics are needed on the ratio of women who have applied and been accepted to run as candidates in elections, as well as their success rate in being elected. Measuring the turnout of women and men at elections is also important. While women have access to voting in all countries with an electoral voting system of government, practical limitations still remain, which tend to affect women more than men. In Ireland, for example, a national survey module on voter participation showed that broadly similar proportions of women and men voted. However, the reasons for not voting varied, with a higher proportion of men citing disillusioned and a higher proportion of women citing lack of transport.
Politicians make policies and public administrators implement them. Thus, the participation of women as decision makers in the civil service is of great importance for gender statistics. As the graph shows, in most of the countries, male ambassadors greatly outnumber their female counterparts. In countries such as the United Kingdom, Italy and Luxembourg, the percentage of women ambassadors is as low as 8%.
As the judicial system provides the legal basis for society, it is important to show the representation of women judges as a measure of gender equality. In some member countries of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, the constitutional courts have varying percentages of women. They range from 0% for Hungary to 30% for France.
Economic decision makers are those who determine and implement economic policies. Economic decision making has traditionally been a male-dominated sphere, although there has been a significant increase over the last 20 years in the participation of women as economists. Women's representation at a decision-making level is still much lower than for men. The graph shows that in the case of central bank board members, except for Sweden, women's representation is minimal. In countries such as Italy, Netherlands, Switzerland and Germany, women are not represented in these leading positions at all.
Managerial positions in the public or private sector are important for decision-making. Analysis of the situation in Sweden provides an interesting insight. In the private sector, there are more men managers than women. But in the public sector, there are more women managers. However, because in the public sector there are a greater number of women employees overall, the proportion of women employees who are managers still remains lower than the proportion of male employees who are managers.
Decision-making topics are generally not included in the work programs of national statistical offices. Some data are available from administrative sources. Investigation and documentation on decision-making is relatively new, country-specific, and widely varied. Data needed to monitor and raise awareness on this issue are held by decision-making institutions, government agencies, and major economic institutions, which do not usually compile information about decision-making. More formal reporting requirements to provide data by sex are required to address the lack of information.
A strong framework for international statistical standards, guidelines and definitions still needs to be developed. Various international institutions and organisations are proposing policy-relevant indicators on the basis of which data should be collected. To support and monitor progress towards gender equality in decision-making, the European Commission maintains a public access database which covers decision-making in the political, public, judicial, and social and economic domains in the EU and some other European countries. It shows the percentage of women and men in a number of decision-making positions in influential organisations. In 1999, the European Council adopted a set of 9 indicators in the area of women and men in decision-making. In 2003, the Council adopted a further set of 9 indicators concerning economic decision-making, such as governors of the central banks, members of the decision-making bodies of the central banks, ministers and deputy ministers of the economic ministries.
In general, a household decision-maker is a person who makes household decisions at all levels relating to the family. For example, on nutrition, healthcare, education, investment, and spending of collective resources. Even though there are some decision-making indicators proposed at the institutional level, indicators on decision-making within the household are still missing. Devising such indicators is complicated, as the designation of decision-maker is seldom formal and differs according to the type of decision to be made.
Data on household decision-making is collected through household surveys. Sometimes the concept of household head is used as an indicator of decision-making, but this may be misleading and not representative of actual participation in household decision-making. More information is required. In South Africa, for example, some surveys ask which member of the household usually brings in the most money, in addition to a question about household head. In the 2001 Labour Force survey, only 7% of the male main money earners were not household heads, while this was the case for 21% of the female main money earners. Another indicator of participation in decision-making is control of the dwelling, such as in whose name the ownership or lease of the dwelling is registered.
Surveys can ask directly about decision-making processes. An example of this is the Generations and Gender programme. This ongoing project comprises a system of panel surveys of nationally representative samples of 18 to 79-year-olds. The surveys include a series of questions on power and decision-making. Who makes the decisions about the following issues in your household? Routine purchases for the household. Occasional, more expensive purchases for the household. The time you spend in paid work. The time your partner or spouse spends in paid work. The way children are raised. Social life and leisure activities. Respondents indicate whether it is always or usually the respondent, his or her partner, whether responsibility is shared, or whether it is somebody else in the household or not living in the household who makes decisions on each type of issue.
Another question related to decision-making in the Generations and Gender surveys concerns the organisation of income. Respondents are shown a card with a list of items and are asked which of the items fits best. How do you and your partner spouse organise your household income? 1. I manage all the money and give my partner spouse his/her share. 2. My partner spouse manages all the money and gives me my share. 3. We pool all the money and each takes out what we need. 4. We pool some of the money and keep the rest separate. 5. We each keep our own money separate.
When it comes to decision-making, equality between women and men is far from being achieved. Data are required to monitor and raise awareness of the situation in different sectors, ranging from the proportion of women and men in top positions in politics and business to those making different types of decisions at the household level. Some of these data are already available from administrative sources, the use of which should be expanded through the regular reporting of such data, disaggregated by sex and other key characteristics, to national statistical offices.